Evaluation Summary: Promoting and protecting the rights of people with disability in Indonesia. Experiences and lessons learned on disability inclusion in a law and justice program. Executive Summary: In the Independent Progress Review or IPR 2014, and in a subsequent DFAT disability study, AIPJ was acknowledged a best practice in disability inclusion and achieving clear and obvious gains in support of the rights of people with disability in Indonesia. DFAT acknowledged in the management response to the IPR that AIPJ has made incorporating disability across all program areas a priority through AIPJ's final work plan, which the FAT and the Government of Indonesia approved in April 2014. In a recent evaluation of the role of civil society in justice reform, Overseas Development Institute, or ODI, found that AIPJ-supported CSOs have expanded their networks and strengthened their relationship with DPOs, CSOs with different specialism, and with government officials, ranging from local representatives to the highest-ranking national officials like the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and the head of the religious court. The effectiveness and efficiency of AIPJ's work has therefore been acknowledged. The purpose of this evaluation was to involve partners in a participatory process so they could identify lessons learned and agree on recommendations for further progress. The key findings are: First, core funding for mainstream and disability CSOs provides important flexibility in resources and capacity that helps them to pursue joint action on policy and legislative reform. Flexible funding allows an organization to be responsive to new and emerging issues and opportunities. Second, funding is important to help create and support emerging networks to take action. Third, longer-term support of organizations is needed as building capacity and changing attitudes and practice takes time. Fourth, funding enables development of new initiatives and innovative models of practice which can be used to demonstrate value and to inform advocacy for government support. Fifth, funding can temporarily fill the gap in government funding for disability, but it can be a problem if donor funding pays for essential services that government should take responsibility for. The key recommendations are: First, facilitate and support partnerships, networks, and alliances of different mainstream and disability actors from government and civil society. Second, dedicate resources for disability-specific and disability-inclusive action. Third, support collaborative action by DPOs with mainstream CSOs to promote disability rights and inclusion. Fourth, strengthen capacity of DPOs and leadership of their representatives. Fifth, make information and processes accessible for people with different disabilities. Promoting and protecting the rights of people with disability in Indonesia. Experience and lessons learned on disability inclusion in a law and justice program. AIPJ is a cooperation between the governments of Indonesia and Australia. It builds on earlier programs that have supported the legal and judicial sector in Indonesia. AIPJ focuses on helping to realize the rights of Indonesians to legal identity, such as birth, marriage, and divorce certificates, to fair and accessible justice services, and to legal information. Partners include key government institutions, civil society, and local communities in Indonesia, at the national level and at the subnational level, where services are delivered directly to the community. This helps lessons from the field influence and inform national policy. AIPJ targets areas where Indonesia has identified the most need and where there can be sustainable and meaningful impact. People with disability are one of the three target groups of AIPJ. The others are women who are poor and vulnerable children. AIPJ aims to ensure inclusion of people with disability in all areas of the program so that Indonesian people with disability will enjoy the right to equitable and fair access to and benefit from legal services. Disability inclusion has been a focus of AIPJ since it commenced, but a more strategic approach was designed in 2012. Implementation of this commenced in early 2013 in partnership with several different groups including, in Indonesia, organizations representing people with disability, disabled people's organizations or DPOs, law and justice and research focused civil society organizations or CSOs, and government ministries and departments including the courts, the Judicial Commissions, the Human Rights Commissions or Komnas HAM, and the National Commissions on Violence Against Women or Komnas Perempuan, and the Anti-Corruption Commission. In Australia, the Australian Human Rights Commission or AHRC, University of NSW, and the National DPO, People with Disability Australia or PWDA. AIPJ has facilitated and supported this partnership to create stronger capacity by bringing together knowledge and skills and resources and by creating coalitions. Disability rights and inclusion remains relatively new, but is a growing and emerging area of practice in international development. It is unusual to find a program that has a specific focus on disability rights and inclusion in the law and justice sector. For these reasons, and because of the approach used through AIPJ to promote and support disability inclusion has been acknowledged as best practice, it was decided by AIPJ's management to explore in more depth and share the strategies applied and the results achieved on disability inclusion in the program. The current phase of the AIPJ program will finish at the end of 2015. It is expected that the lessons learned from this evaluation will help in guiding decisions about the future strategic direction, focus, and type of investments on disability inclusion in the next stage of the program. The evaluation findings and recommendations will be shared more widely and are expected to be of value of interest for DFAT's other programs in Indonesia and elsewhere, the government of Indonesia, and other donors and development partners. The evaluation was completed in stages over a 12-month period between November 2014 and 2015. The evaluation process benefited from strong participation and contribution from the AIPJ partners in all stages, the design, data collection, analysis, and in developing conclusion and recommendations that are made. The intent was that the evaluation should strongly voice the views of the partners who have been central to the implementation of the disability strategy. It was also anticipated that it should be a mutual learning and capacity building process that will strengthen the working relationship and shared understanding between the AIPJ team and partners. It is felt that both of these intentions have been fulfilled, and thanks is extended to the partners who contributed so generously and positively to the process. This document presents the key findings and lessons learned about the strategies that were used in the AIPJ program to promote disability rights and include people with disability. Accompanying this report and reference in relevant sections are a series of studies that describe the outcomes that have been achieved. This illustrates in more detail the strategies and activities that were implemented and have contributed to these results. Disability rights and inclusion. Disability and exclusion. Internationally, during the last 10 years, progress has taken on promoting awareness and commitment to disability rights and inclusion in mainstream civil society, government's policies and programs. People with disability, however, remain amongst the most marginalized and excluded group in society. People with disability make up about 15% of any population and over 20% of the world's poorest and affected by disability directly or through family members. Women are more directly adversely impacted as mothers of children with disability, being primary carers and through double discrimination, including gender-based violence that women with disability often experience. Exclusion and discrimination experience varies. People with hearing impairment or who are deaf are often less represented due to communication barriers, and people with psychiatric and psychological impairment, learning disability and intellectual impairments, multiple or complex disability often experience more stigma and greater difficulty to voice and have heard their priorities and needs. People living in more remote areas struggle to get access to services. Disability rights. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, or UNCRPD, adopted in December 2006, was a significant and major turning point for disability rights globally. It articulates the specific rights that people with disability have and provides a framework on rights-based inclusive legislation, policies, programs, and services for governments, civil societies, and private sector to commit to and use to change their policies and practices. The UNCRPD makes specific reference to accessible and fair law and justice services and processes in Articles 12, 13, 14, and 15. In Article 32 states the responsibility that state parties that have committed to the Convention have, which both Australia and Indonesia have, to recognize and include disability in their international development assistance programs. Although people with disability were not recognized in the Millennium Development Goals, their rights and priorities have been included in the Sustainable Development Goals. Disability in Indonesia. Indonesia ratified the UNCRPD in November 2011 and in doing so made a commitment to protecting and promoting the rights of people with disability. Some progress has started in relation to amendment of the National Disability Policy. This work is ongoing, but when completed, it shall help ensure that the policy and legislative frameworks on disability in Indonesia are in line with the ambitions and expectations of the UNCRPD. Overall, though in Indonesia a charity and medical model about disability prevails and people with disability commonly experience discrimination and barriers that prevent them accessing and enjoying their human rights. This includes access to basic services, health, education, transport, law and justice, and to information and sharing their views. When a person with disability is a victim of a crime, only 8% of the cases brought to the courts are heard. This is because the court don't know how to communicate with the victims, particularly those with intellectual impairment or people with communication disabilities. Examples were found of police not taking evidence from alleged victims of rape who are deaf or have an intellectual impairment, which meant that the charges were not made and the case did not proceed to court. Pusham UII research findings. AIPJ's Disability Inclusion Strategy. A small team in AIPJ consisting of a National Program Technical Coordinator, an Activity Coordinator, and an International Senior Technical Advisor has managed the design and implementation of the Disability Inclusion Strategy. The strategy was designed in December 2013 in consultation with representatives from Indonesian DPOs, governments, and civil society organizations, and building on the experience of the initial phase of activities and partnership that had been implemented through AIPJ since 2011. The overall goal. people with disability in Indonesia are able to realize their rights equitably and fairly like others, particularly their rights to legal identity, law and justice services, and legal information. The theory of change. In order to make progress towards achievement of the goal, changes in four interrelated areas need to take place. Changes are expected to occur through implementing the strategies outlined below, focusing on individuals, organizations, and systems, and implemented through formal processes like training, policy reviews, research, and through more informal interaction and engagement. Strategies to support change and progress towards this goal. Twin-track approach that focus both on activities that specially target people with disability and supports of disability inclusive initiatives that aim to ensure people with disability have access to and benefit from mainstream services. Partnerships with disabled people's organizations or DPOs that represent people with disability, and with the Indonesian government and civil society organizations or CSOs that work in the law and justice. Keterangan gambar. Gambar dibaca dari kanan ke kiri searah jarum jam. Strategy work in partnerships. Strategy capacity of individuals. Access to resources, information and quality services available and accessible. Informal, policies and laws inclusive and rights-based, organizational policies and SOPs, and government's policies, legislations, and regulations. Strategy, networks and coalitions. Twin-track approach. Organizations. Strategy capacity of organizations. Attitudes and practice. Discrimination reduced and rights-based approach applied. Formal. Awareness and understanding. People with disability know about their rights and of legal and justice services, and mainstream actors aware, like government and civil society, about rights and priorities of people with disability. Strategy, funding, and resources. The focus of the inputs and activities implemented with partners are capacity strengthening of people with disability and their representatives' organizations through technical training, awareness, access to information, and ideas. Capacity strengthening that focuses on individuals from governments and CSOs and of their organizations through technical training, awareness, access to information and ideas, and funding. Facilitating and creating opportunities for links and formation of networks between AIPJ partners with Indonesian agencies, government, and non-government, and with Australian partners that can contribute to stronger capacity, leverage influence, and support awareness and advocacy, particularly for promoting new ideas, policy reform, and new and expanded services. Providing dedicated resources to AIPJ partners to support initiatives through funding specific activities, including research, training, publication, advocacy for organizational operational cost, and by providing technical assistance and information resources. The evaluation methodology and process. The AIPJ Disability Team worked with the AIPJ partners to complete this evaluation about the experiences and lessons learned from the strategies used to promote and progress disability inclusion program. A case study methodology was used that explored the strategies that have been applied and the factors that contributed to the results achieved. Data was collected and analyzed using the outcome harvesting methodology. This is a useful approach to use retrospectively to help understand how change has occurred. It is of particular value in situations where the pathway for change is complex and influenced by many enabling and confounding factors, which is often the case in programs where change in capacity through advocacy and wider policy reform is being sought. Features of the evaluation process. The methodology was partner-led and participatory. Partners came together to design the evaluation and to select the key outcome areas that they felt it was important to investigate and share with external audiences so to help our own understanding and that of others about practices in effective disability inclusion. It was implemented in stages over 12 months. This enabled partners to genuinely contribute to data collection, analysis, and learning by fitting the evaluation into their ongoing workloads. The voice and experiences of those who contributed to and who have benefited from the program were emphasized by giving them time and opportunity to share what has changed for them and what they have learned. It communicates and shares the evaluation findings and recommendations in a way that genuinely captures the perspectives of the partners and others who contributed to the activities. The evaluation findings and examples given are practical and applicable because they are from real practice. It should help others to see how they can apply the experiences and lessons. Accessible formats, language, and processes were used throughout so that a diverse range of people could contribute to the evaluation and can access the results and lessons learned. Results, the outcomes areas, case studies that capture the changes that have taken place, and the strategies and factors that have contributed to the results have been prepared and attached to this report. The case studies describe changes that have been supported by AIPJ, including people with disability are now more confident and active leaders who are advocating and taking greater action on disability rights and inclusion. DPOs are now stronger and are more active in promoting and defending the rights and priorities of people with disability. Individuals from government and civil society in Indonesia who work in the law and justice are now more aware of and committed to disability rights and to including people with disability in their work. Mainstream civil society organizations and government agencies in Indonesia have taken action to promote and support the rights and inclusion people with disability in their services and as part of their organization's operational procedures and strategy. Law and justice services are becoming more inclusive and accessible, and people with disability are obtaining better quality information and services. Reform in government regulations and legislation that promotes and protect the rights of people with disability is progressing. Evaluation Report. This report focuses on presenting findings and lessons learned about the effectiveness of the strategies used by the AIPJ program in promoting and supporting realization of the rights of people with disability in Indonesia. Advice is given from AIPJ and our partners on strategies, priorities, and focus for future disability-inclusive development programs that apply to the law and justice sector in Indonesia and more widely. For more details about the specific changes, strategies, and lessons learned, the reader is referred to the case studies attached. Result 1. Leadership by people with disability through strong DPOs and confident leaders. In quote, Yuyun, I now have more courage and was really proud to be part of the small working group for the ICCPR report related to dignity and rights of disabled people. In quote, Eddie has contributed new regulations for the district on child protection, making sure it includes disability. In quote, Juniati, I only came to know properly about the CRPD when I went to Australia. Before I was afraid to make a move on it and fight for my rights. Provincial DPO capacity building. The involvement of CONAS Difabel members as facilitators contributed to wider linkage between disabled people organizations, particularly between Java and East Indonesia. For the new established organization like Gerkatin NTB, it was a valuable exposure to meet and learn from other organizations. Sigap with the DPO Gerkatin supported a young woman who is deaf who was victim of a sexual assault attack to be successful in seeking services from law enforcement and court officials. The perpetrator of the crime was convicted and is serving a sentence for his crime. AIPJ has supported capacity strengthening of certain DPOs and individual leaders to increase the skills, knowledge, and experience of leaders in the disability movement in Indonesia and assist them to initiate action that promotes awareness and protection of the rights of people with disability. Strengthen the organizational capacity of DPOs so they can better represent the priorities and needs of their members by increasing awareness, taking action through advocacy and campaigns, and improving access to quality services. The key strategies used: differentiated approach to capacity strengthening through specific training, exposure to new ideas and approaches, access to new information, participation in networks, and practical application of skills and knowledge with mentoring and technical advice. Incremental inputs were provided over an extended period of time, 2 to 3 years, in a flexible way that was responsive to emergent priorities and opportunities. The skills and experience of peer DPO leaders were used to provide capacity development inputs in different ways, including technical advice, training, mentoring, exposure to new and different ideas and practice, and facilitating networking opportunities. Care funding and organizational capacity development support provided over an extended period of time to 2 relatively small DPOs, Sigap and Sabda, that have a national reach in Indonesia and existing experience and expertise in disability rights, law, and justice. Selective sharing of the experience and knowledge on disability rights from the Australian context through study tour for leaders to Australia and meetings and training events with Australian partners in Indonesia. The lessons learned: care funding over an extended period of time gives opportunities and greater flexibility for DPOs to build wider capacity of their staff and develop systems and processes for their organizations, which cannot easily happen through funding for specific project, which is often only short-term and designated for certain activities. Exposure to new ideas and practice outside the individual's immediate location, for example at a national level, in different provincial areas and in Australia, helps to broaden understanding and inspires, leading to greater confidence to try new ideas and approaches on return to own location. Practical application of skills and knowledge in a supportive environment and providing ongoing mentoring and accompaniment assist to build confidence and further increase capacity of individuals. It is important to select motivated and committed individuals who are open-minded and interested to learn and contribute. The contributions made by DPO leaders and people with disability to peers in other DPOs are relevant and were valued and helpful. Care about the time demands placed on DPO leaders by the AIPJ program activities, as it may reduce the time they can dedicate to their own organizations, and this may inadvertently deplete capacity and effectiveness. Directly contracting small DPOs for activities is difficult if they do not have the management capacity to meet the due diligence requirements of the managing contractor CARDNO. The selection processes used for participating DPOs and individuals should be transparent and openly communicated to help manage and avoid risk of perceived favoritism and misconceptions by other DPOs and their representatives. Result 2. Knowledge and commitment of mainstream partners and program staff. Anti-Corruption Team AIPJ. In quote, we had been asked to include disability before, but when we heard an example, we understood the issue. Coming from people with real experience creates empathy and whole different dynamic. Pusham UII training of law enforcement officials. In quote, almost all the law enforcers did not have any idea about disability. They considered that people with disability did not have a right to get service, but through the training process, they changed their view and understood that this perspective was incorrect. And understand now that if equality of access is made, then the legal process can work for disabled people like any other person. LBH Jakarta. In quote, before the AIPJ program, we talked about disability to lawyers, but only as an issue. For example, deaf clients and people with mental disability. But we did not know how to mainstream the issue. LBH Makassar. In quote, the knowledge of LBH Makassar about disability was based on empathy and the charity. It was not about rights. TAF. In quote, gaining confidence and overcoming concerns about the unknown and not being the expert in disability. The Supreme Court is the first government website in Indonesia to be made accessible using international standards for people with visual impairment who use screen reader software. AIPJ has supported capacity strengthening of individuals and organizations from government and civil society and colleagues from other AIPJ teams who work in law and justice with the aim to increase the awareness and knowledge of individual service providers, advocates and policymakers in law and justice about disability rights and how to equitably and fairly include people with disability. Strengthen the capacity of government and non-government organizations so that they promote and protect the rights of people with disability and provide quality services and information that is accessible, inclusive, and beneficial. Increase awareness, understanding, and commitment of the AIPJ staff about disability rights so they, with their partners, seek ways to promote and support mainstreaming of disability inclusion in their activities. The key strategies used: specific training and guidelines developed on disability rights and inclusion for AIPJ staff by the AIPJ Disability Team with partner DPOs. Explored opportunities and provided technical advice on the design and implementation of disability-inclusive activities by AIPJ staff and their partners, including CSOs, receiving core funding through AIPJ. Promoted and supported disability-inclusive practice by legal aid providers, courts, and law enforcement officials in partnership with DPOs through training, technical support, and funding. Facilitated joint planning, reflection, and learning forums on disability inclusion involving AIPJ staff, law and justice, and disability partners. Supported the development of information resources, curriculum, and implementation of training on disability rights and inclusion by legal aid organizations and Pusham UII, a human rights research and training center working in partnership with DPOs. Supported training, cooperation, and exchanges between the Australian Human Rights Commission and Australian DPOs with Indonesian Human Rights Commission or Komnas HAM and Commission for Women, Komnas Perempuan, and DPOs on the CRPD and human rights issues concerning women with disability. The lessons learned. The lived experience that people with disability bring to training, forums, and meetings is very effective in showing the relevance and increasing the level of interest and commitment of program staff and representatives of mainstream organizations to include disability in their practice. Informal engagement with DPO representatives who can share ideas and information is an effective way to raise awareness and interest of mainstream actors and see relevance of the issue in their own areas of work. Charismatic and capable leaders of DPOs are influential in championing disability rights and so increasing interest and commitment of mainstream actors on disability inclusion. Participatory and practice-based training is effective in raising awareness and changing understanding of mainstream service providers, including law enforcement and justice officials. Research and evidence strengthen the relevance and quality of training materials and the curriculum. Commitment and ownership by the leadership of an organization is important for disability inclusion to be successfully mainstreamed and sustained. If mainstream organizations put in place Standard Operational Procedure or SOP on disability, it increases the likelihood of sustained commitment of resources and action by the organization. Core funding created opportunity and provided additional resources that helps mainstream organizations to implement disability inclusive practices. Setting disability as a target in AIPJ and it being a priority of DFATX as an incentive that helped to raise interest and motivate commitment to disability inclusion of mainstream organizations. When organizations have prior interest and some understanding of disability, the additional capacity or technical funding, information, and networks provided will be more effective. Champions in an organization assist progress on disability inclusion to occur more quickly and effectively. Result 3. Bring disability-focused and mainstream organizations together and they can find common issues to work on. Anti-corruption. The AIPJ Anti-Corruption Team introduced the DPOs to the Corruption Eradication Commission or KPK and the Women Against Corruption, Saya Perempuan Anti Korupsi or SPAK movement. Within a year, people with disabilities are effectively involved in the SPAK movement have successfully strengthened the network with the KPK and other anti-corruption activists and organizations. SIGAP Advocacy. SIGAP worked with other civil society and legal aid organizations, and through their advocacy, a discriminatory clause in the regulations of the public university was removed. They also advocated with Komnas Perempuan to make DNA testing free and accessible to all women who are victims of sexual violence and rape. And through social media publicity, they successfully advocated for a young boy with disability to be allowed to re-enroll in his school. Komnas Perempuan, in quote, we have a wider network on disability. When we want to discuss violence against women with disabilities, we not only discuss with the DPOs, but with other NGOs. AIPJ has created opportunities and facilitated introduction and connections between DPOs, government, human rights, and civil society organizations based around the shared interest of disability rights, law, and justice with the aim to promote sharing of information, resources, expertise, and experience between the different actors, create multi-stakeholder networks and coalitions that can collaborate on issues of shared interest and concern related to disability rights and inclusion. Strengthen the scale and quality of advocacy and reform actions through use of the breadth of skill, resources, and influence that the different actors each brings. Identify opportunities and collaborate on creating more accessible and inclusive services. The key strategies used: created opportunities that bring the range of actors together on issues of common interest through facilitating conferences, meetings, workshops, and other forums and informal introductions. encourage and support joint action between partners from disability and law and justice sector, both through formal funding agreements and informal engagement and collaboration. The lessons learned. Networking facilitated by AIPJ helps in opening the doors of government agencies, which may not be possible to do if CSOs are working alone. AIPJ's status and position helps facilitate access to senior level of government by CSO actors that may otherwise be hard to reach. And this helps issues and ideas to be introduced to influential decision makers. Reform on disability rights and inclusion is more effective and likely to succeed if multiple actors, mainstream CSOs and DPOs work together. Reform requires the presence and commitment of government working alongside and with mainstream and disability civil society organizations. Networking by DPOs with mainstream organizations help to expand services to reach more people. Active connections and networks between actors in different sectors and locations strengthens the speed and effectiveness of campaigns and advocacy. Media, social, radio, TV, and print offer an important channel for getting information out to the public and strengthen awareness, advocacy, and campaigns. Connections that CSOs and DPOs have with the human rights, anti-corruption, and justice commissions have been very important and helped strengthen advocacy on issues of disability discriminations and human rights violations and reform. Networking between different stakeholders provides opportunities to identify innovation and provides a catalyst to implement new ideas. Result 4. Dedicates funding and technical assistance, supports disability inclusive and mainstream action. TAF resources made available through core funding helped CSO to implement disability inclusion as part of their organizational strengthening and for DPOs to collaborate and give support. LBH Jakarta. In quote, with the inputs of Cucu, an AIPJ staff, we learned a lot and realized that it was not something to worry about. Over time, with so many inputs, we started to understand about disability. LBH Makassar. In quote, additional core funding provided resources needed for LBH Makassar to invest in strengthening its own capacity. Pusham UII. In quote, further substantial investments of resources and training and socializing will be needed from the Supreme Court if genuine commitment and action on disability inclusion is to progress nationally, given the number of courts in Indonesia. AIPJ has dedicated specific funding and technical resources to AIPJ's partners, DPOs, governments, and civil society organizations with the aim to strengthen organizational capacity of both DPOs and mainstream CSOs, implement activities that creates awareness and understanding on disability rights and inclusion, design and implement innovative practice that increases available and accessible services in law and justice for people with disability, and may be used as models for wider replication. Increase evidence and knowledge about disability, discrimination, and violation of the human rights of people with disability. The key strategies used: core funding and technical support for DPOs and CSOs that assists them to strengthen their organizational capacity and provides opportunity for engaging on disability and law and justice issues. Funding for designated activities that promote and support awareness and information on disability rights and services that are disability inclusive. Access to technical advice and support from AIPJ disability team and other sources within Indonesia and Australia. The lessons learned: Core funding for mainstream and disability CSOs provides important flexibility in resources and capacity that helps them to pursue joint action on policy and legislative reform. Flexible funding allows the organizations to be responsive to new and emerging issues and opportunities. Funding is important to help create and support emerging networks take action. Longer-term support of organizations is needed as building capacity and changing attitudes and practice takes time. Funding enables development of new initiative and innovative models of practice which can be used to demonstrate value and to inform advocacy for government support. Funding can fill the gap in government's funding for disability, but it can be a problem if donor funding pays for essential services that government should take responsibility for. Conclusions about the strategies to promote and support disability rights and inclusion applied in the AIPJ program. During the validation and learning workshop, the AIPJ partners reached the following conclusions about effective strategies implemented by AIPJ to promote and support disability rights and inclusion. In quote, AIPJ has helped to create a disability social movement in Indonesia that is solid and influential. First, facilitating and supporting partnerships, networks, and alliances that bring together a range of actors from the disability movement, wider civil society, and government agencies and departments helps to create a strong social movement to work on and for disability rights. In quote, AIPJ connects institutions and through the opportunities it connects for networking has helped to be a catalyst for new ideas leading to new practices. Second, collaboration between mainstream and disability-specific organizations strengthen initiatives and actions, particularly in relation to advocacy, and helps to create new ideas and innovation in practice. In quote, nothing about us without us. Third, stronger leadership and voice of people with disability and DPOs has been made possible through the different ways capacity has been strengthened and the opportunities to engage and participate that have been created for both individuals and organizations. In quote, respective to diversity and respecting the common rights of accessibility. Fourth, accessible information and processes has helped to enable more effective contribution and fairer and more equitable participation by people with disability in mainstream development processes. In quote, being responsive and making adjustments while working within the parameters of what we want to and need to achieve. Fifth, flexibility and responsiveness of the implementing approach used while working within an overall strategic framework has helped to ensure that the inputs provided and the activities supported evolve and remain relevant. In quote, research and testing new initiatives that show merit and value may trigger others, particularly government, to take actions. Government is often not willing or able to take action. Sixth, additional financial resources provided to organizations and for specific projects has provided an opportunity for innovative practice that helps to provide a strong basis for advocacy and influencing government. In quote, working with AIPJ, the result will become bigger. Seventh, influential role that AIPJ has as a bilateral international development program has been helpful, particularly in relation to creating wider and more interest, commitment, and action by government, centrally and at the provincial level, and with mainstream civil society organizations and NGOs. Program efficiency. AIPJ resorts disability inclusion in a number of ways. First, through a dedicated disability team. AIPJ engaged people with disabilities as co-coordinators, trainers, and advocates, as well as an international advisor to support design, policy, and evaluation, and a project manager with disability inclusion experience to support implementation. Second, trained all AIPJ staff and partners in accessibility and modeled accessibility in the AIPJ office. The Asia Foundation and other partners followed. Third, core funding to two national partners, SIGAP and SAPDA, totaling $575,910 as well as the mentoring and support from the Asia Foundation and AIPJ teams. Fourth, convening and funding DPO representatives in the Disability Convention or DISCO team to analyze Indonesia's record in implementing the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, prepare a shadow report on behalf of civil society, and influence the government's laws and policies. This funding totaled $220,000. Fifth, supporting initiatives to make justice services more accessible to people with disabilities, including community paralegals, sign language interpreting, evaluation of court decisions affecting people with disability, and training of justice officials, accessible websites for the visually impaired, totaling $680,021. Sixth, capacity building of regional DPOs, coordination, evaluation, and other initiatives, $210,000. Because people with disabilities were an AIPJ target group, all teams prioritized people with disability, but did not record cost separately for this support. Anti-corruption supported DPOs in preventing corruption in the Ministry of Social Affairs and established Saya Perempuan Anti Korupsi or SPAK Disabilitas. Legal identity made integrated mobile services accessible and targeted special needs schools. Court reform and legal aid were well integrated in the above activities, and partners expanded their own services for people with disabilities. AIPJ provincial teams also supported regional DPOs on a regular basis. AIPJ expenditure on disability activities was 1.96 million Australian dollars, representing 5.5% of AIPJ activity expenditure, not including contribution from programs that were not costed. It was not possible to compare the relative efficiency of the different funding methods as they combined to produce broader results. For example, the passing of disability law in March 2006 was a combination of CSO and DPO collaboration, core funding, DPO leadership development, DISCO advocacy, and coordination. However, a reasonable measure of efficiency is in the utilization of national resources as opposed to imported resources, and by that measure, AIPJ was extremely effective, utilizing almost exclusively national resources with very limited short-term advisory inputs from an international senior advisor and peer-to-peer support from People with Disabilities Australia and the Australian Human Rights Commission. Recommendations on future priorities and strategies. Based on the findings and learning from the evaluation, the AIPJ staff and partners have identified recommendations for stakeholders to take forward to effectively progress the realization of disability rights and effective inclusion of people with disability in Indonesia. The recommendations are made to certain stakeholders that are in positions of influence and have responsibility to take action to make a positive contribution and change. The stakeholders are those managing the design and implementing of the transition phase and, if relevant, the next phase of Australian support to the justice sector. Development partners, particularly the Australian government through DFAT and other international governments and non-government development organizations. The governments of Indonesia, national and provincial. Indonesian civil society organizations, disability-focused and mainstream. Recommendation 1. Facilitate and support partnerships, networks, and alliances of different mainstream and disability actors from governments and civil society. Those managing the transition phase of Australia's support to the justice sector. Create opportunities and facilitate meetings that bring together disability-specific with mainstream civil society organizations that share areas of interest as a way to help them explore and identify ways to collaborate. Provide dedicated resources to both DPOs and mainstream civil society, law and justice organizations to support networking and partnerships that may lead to joint action. Development partners including DFAT use their influence as international development partners to convince forums and make links between the different actors, particularly helping to facilitate access and interests of senior government decision makers. The government of Indonesia include representatives from disability organizations as part of civil society groups that contribute to policy and program reform processes at both provincial and national level. Be a more active participant in multi-stakeholder forums at the provincial and national level with disability and mainstream CSOs. Indonesian civil society organizations seek out other organizations with shared interests and explore ways that disability inclusion can be jointly taken forward. Recommendation 2. Dedicate resources for disability-specific and disability-inclusive action. Those managing the transition phase of Australia's support the justice sector have designated staff who ideally are people with disability to manage the disability component of the work and provide technical assistance and advice. Allocate a specific budget for disability-specific and for mainstream inclusive activities. Development partners including DFAT make resources available for disability rights and inclusion to CSOs and government as part of the funding and partnership agreements. The government of Indonesia dedicate resources in the budget nationally and provincial level for disability accessible and inclusive services and for strengthening capacity of public sector staff on disability rights and inclusion. Recommendation 3. Collaborative actions by GPOs with mainstream CSOs that promotes and supports disability rights and inclusion. Those managing the transition phase of Australia's support to the justice sector. Dedicate resources in the budget to support joint action by disability and mainstream actors, particularly innovate practice that has the potential to generate learning as a basis for advocacy for standards and wider adoption of effective disability-inclusive practice. Development partners including DFAT encourage innovative practice in disability inclusion through dedicating resources and providing incentives for disability inclusion in their partnership and funding agreements. Indonesian civil society organizations access and make use of the different experience and expertise that DPOs and mainstream organizations each have to help strengthen effectiveness and impact of disability-inclusive activities, including in research, training, advocacy, and campaigns. Recommendation 4. Strengthen capacity of DPOs and leadership of their representatives. those managing the transition phase of Australia's support to the justice sector. Dedicate resources in the budget for capacity strengthening of DPOs and individual leaders. Focus support on emergent leaders and smaller local level DPOs that often get less opportunity to access funding and technical assistance. Flexibly manage the capacity strengthening activities by being responsive to emerging priorities and new opportunities. Appoint capable and active leaders from the disability network who are people with disability as staff and consultants to help to further strengthen their knowledge and confidence, and to use their personal experience as people with disability in positions that will increase awareness and influence and motivate others to take action. Development partners including DFAT. Provide resources to strengthen capacity of DPOs and leaders through long-term support that is responsive and tailored to meet the specific priorities and capacity needs. Recommendation 5. Make information and process accessible for people with different disabilities. Those managing the transition phase of Australia's support to the justice sector. Commit and invest in adjustments to ensure all activities, information, and the work environment is accessible for partners, staff, and other participants with disabilities. Work with disability organizations and DPOs that have expertise in accessible processes, including Mitra Netra for access by people with visual impairment and who are blind, and Gerkatin, sign language interpreting. Allocates resources for adjustments to promote accessibility in the budget of all activities. Development partners including DFAT. Sets requirements and make provisions for adjustments as part of the contracts and funding agreements with government and CSOs. Government of Indonesia. In line with the requirements in the UNCRPD, should make investment so that services, processes, and information is accessible to people with disability, including websites, meet accessible standards, and adjustments made on accessible infrastructure and sign language interpreters. Indonesian civil society organizations. Audit and seek advice on access standards to help them determine the adjustments required to make their work environment, services, and activities more accessible. Include a section on disability in their standard operational procedures to guide inclusive practice and be used as a way to hold their organizations accountable. 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 Accountable.